everyone. Welcome back to the Blossoming Together podcast. Today we're going to be talking about supervision and some of the requirements that are needed. Let's go right into the objectives.
Beautiful. Our first objective today is understanding and implementing effective supervision practices. And we're going to be relating to the task list items, task H1, H2, and H3.
The second objective is enhancing trainee competence through feedback and skill development. And this relates back to task list A5, H4, H6. All right. So I feel like this is one of those topics where people are always like stuck talking about, like, because I feel like we're always getting updates, right?
Yeah, the BACB is changing things. Like, I get the emails of like, okay, these are the upcoming changes.
And even though I think everyone is subscribed to the emails and they get it, there's always this like, I don't know why, but there's always this like chaos of like
things are missed or like, yeah.
So we kind of want to just touch on, even us, like we felt like we learned a lot
when
we're going through the information.
It was a good reminder and refresher for us.
So we kind of touch on it and make sure everyone else also knew some of this information.
Yes, that sounds great.
All right. So first things first, we're going to do something really simple. Wanted to go over just what two types of fieldwork experiences there are.
Yep.
So we have supervised fieldwork, which you need 2,000 fieldwork hours for. And then we have concentrated supervised fieldwork where you need 1,500 hours.
Yep. And then, so kind of with that, you also need, so with the 2,000 fieldwork hours, if you're doing supervised fieldwork, you also need 5% of direct supervision. And then another big difference is for concentrated supervised fieldwork, so that's the 1,500 hours, you need 10% supervision. So that's why the hours are reduced, because you're getting a little bit more of that like one-to-one time with your BCBA directly supervising you.
And that makes sense. What did you have when you were in, or was this before this changed, right?
Yes, yeah. So this changed. So I did technically, like now it would be considered the supervised fieldwork, but at my time it was 1,500 hours.
Yeah.
And then the concentrated fieldwork was only 750. So I had a few.
Wow, imagine.
I know. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's nothing.
I did the concentrated supervised fieldwork.
Yeah.
And that was when it was concentrated supervised fieldwork. And it had just changed, I think.
It was the 1,500 and you get the 10%.
Yep, it had just changed.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you felt like with the concentrated, doing like a little bit less hours, but with more supervision with your supervisor, I guess?
So,
how did that go?
Honestly, I felt like I didn't notice because our BCBAs where I did my fieldwork, we're always supervising at that percentage or more, no matter what. So I was hitting the hours consistently no matter what. I think because I was one of the first students here, we had started off actually as supervised.
Okay,
yeah, to
like
supervise,
the more hours.
Yeah. And then once we were looking at like our numbers, we're like, wow, we're hitting this much every month. Why don't we change it? And that's when we realized, hey, like all of our students here could do this because our BCBAs are providing that much supervision.
Yeah. So with my experience, it was good. Like I've talked about my supervisee like experience often. I had a good experience because I made it what I wanted it to be, but I did get that like less direct supervision. But I wouldn't have known the difference because their option wasn't available to me like at my place. So I didn't.
And you didn't know.
Yeah.
When did you realize what the difference was? Was it when you came here?
A little bit when I came here, but mostly when I was talking to my classmates. Like I had a few classmates who the program that I did, they paired with a fieldwork site, and they were all doing like the 750 hours with the intensive supervision. And I was like, oh, you're getting that much like time per week.
Yeah.
Like currently, like when I supervise my students, I meet with them weekly. But when I was a supervisee, I was only getting, I think like one direct meeting a month. And then the rest of my supervised time was with direct clients.
Oh.
So it just didn't feel like, at looking back, I was like, okay, it might not have been as personal. Like we didn't have as much time to get the personal like note in it.
And I had the weekly meetings.
Did you?
Yeah, we had the weekly meetings, and I did feel like it was a very personal like, relationship. And we're going to touch on it a little more later, I know, but I had multiple not just one throughout the whole experience. So I had two main ones that I was like meeting with all the time. And then I had different ones that were supervising me with my clients as well. Yeah.
I really like that. And something that we've like started incorporating now too is like changing up the supervisor throughout the experience so that that supervisee gets more I guess just like a better understanding of how different BCBAs do things.
Yeah.
Like not every BCBA is going to complete their tasks the same way.
Right. And I agree. And I also feel like, when I was in that position, I felt like, I picked different things up from each person that I don't think I would have been able to like pick up if I
didn't have
that experience, or I would have been, I don't know, maybe molded like the first person.
Yeah.
But I had an experience and I was able to pick and choose also, like, I like this quality from this supervisor and I like this quality from this supervisor. And maybe I don't like this quality, which, you know, not to, most people don't hate their supervisors, but, you know, if you have multiple, you could pick, I hear that too.
Get skills from other people.
Yeah, or be like, learn, like, I don't like how people do that, or I don't want to be a BCBA that does that, because you saw that one does it this way and one doesn't.
Right, and you figured that out. And yeah, I think that's one thing that I didn't get, like, as a supervisee. Like, I didn't realize that I hadn't gotten that. I only had one.
Was the person that was meeting with you, your one-on-one, also the person that was in charge of your direct clients, or was that different as well?
Yep, they were in charge of my direct clients. So I still had the multiple supervisors, and we'll kind of get into what that means a little bit. But I still was primarily assigned to her caseload. So we did it teams. So, like, if I was her supervisee, I was assigned to her team. So I had mostly her kiddos. And then if I covered other kids with other BCBAs, they would supervise me and still be able to provide me hours.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And I feel like everyone's experience is so unique.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you go on Facebook or when you reach out to other people, you learn that everyone's gone through a different experience.
Yeah, they all have their
own.
And
then also, like, the experience of your supervisors is so different than yours, where, like, it gets all meshed together. And that's where I feel like a lot of these rules get jumbled up.
It's really important for us to, like, when we were prepping, I was like, I'm so glad that I'm getting this refresher to understand, like, how to best support my supervisors. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a requirement. Like, let me make sure that I'm hitting that.
Or even, like, remember, because I know since it changed while you were a student, like, oh, this was different than when I was. Because I feel like that would be ingrained in my mind.
Yeah, sometimes I, like, use the
way you
terms.
learned it.
Yeah, and I'm like, wait a second, that's not it. So I have my binder with all my stuff, and I, like, refer to it, you know, in my organization. Something else with, like, the roles and responsibilities of a supervisor and a supervisee that we kind of wanted to touch on, and we've mentioned it briefly. So there's a student and a supervising BCBA. The student can also be, we've kind of referred to throughout, as, like, a trainee, supervisee, or student. Like, there are different terms that we might refer to them. And then, like, supervisor or supervising BCBA.
Yeah. I always called my the one I met with one-on-one, my main. I don't know why. I just called them, that's my main supervisor. And then everyone else was like, oh, I have their clients.
They're my BCBAs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of how I was too, like, with my main supervisor.
And then I feel like we're going to get into more, like, crazy terms, because we're going to talk about the consulting supervisor in a little bit. And that's where I feel like that's when I get, like, super, like, whoa.
Those are the things that I'm like, I wouldn't know unless I keep referring back to my notes. With a supervising BCBA, they must be an active BCBA with no disciplinary, like, sanctions. And if they're certified for less than a year, they require monthly consultation from a qualified consulting supervisor. And we kind of talked about a little bit about the percentages and stuff too. Do you want to jump in about the consulting supervisor a little bit?
The consulting, before we even get there are also two other people or two other licenses that can provide supervision.
Okay,
correct?
yeah, this is where it's, like, interesting.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why, because it was never my experience.
No.
And even though I've read this multiple times, I was like, huh.
Like, I never directly encountered this, so I didn't realize.
So, something that we learned from looking at the BACB website yesterday was a licensed psychologist is a licensed or registered psychologist certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology and Behavioral and Cognitive Psychology who was tested in ABA. They can also provide supervision, but this is changing. So this method ends January 1st, 2026.
So pretty soon.
But fieldwork obtained before then can be submitted until January 1st, 2032.
Okay. So it's going to,
So you have a very tiny window, like, if you've started to finish up your hours and get it submitted.
Yeah.
And I know, like, once the changes happen, everyone's going to be like, what do we do?
Wait a second. Yeah.
And then another one is a verified course sequence instructor. So this is an authorized verified course sequence instructor. It's kind of like your course instructors, maybe at, like, where you're going to school. Yeah. They can also provide supervision.
Yeah.
And then this qualification method ends January 1st, 2026 also, but fieldwork obtained before then can be submitted until January 1st, 2032.
Okay, so both of those currently are supervisors, but they're ending
soon.
And
2025 is coming up, so you got a year kind of.
A year and a few months, and then you can continue to submit.
By the way, today is August
What, 28th?
August 28th, 2024.
Yeah. Oh my
so
God.
if you're watching this 2 years from now.
But when it airs.
Yeah, when it airs, it makes sense. But when you watch it 2 years from now, please.
Refer to the date,
Yeah,
okay?
please go onto the BACB website and look up the qualifications.
Oh my gosh, I'm dead.
Because I'm like, wait, I just thought of that. I was like,
I know, just in case. Like,
what if it changes tomorrow?
It's evergreen content. It's going to keep going.
Yeah, we love it.
Oh my gosh. Getting back to like the roles and responsibilities. So we have the supervisor and their trainee relationship. So some kind of key things to keep in mind when you are getting a supervisor or supervising a like candidate. The supervisors cannot be related to, subordinate to, employed by, or in a multiple relationship with the trainee during their fieldwork experience, which makes total sense. Employment, though, does not include being compensated, like compensating the supervisor for supervisee, like, requirements.
So this is kind of, to break it down, because we were so confused when we read. They were like, people pay for their supervision, like especially when they're like remote or like, near place or living someplace where there aren't supervisors by them. We see this all the time.
Yes, like we are blessed. We are able to get our fieldwork in-house, but a lot of people don't have that opportunity.
So they pay for their supervision. What we're talking about, which isn't allowed, is say you got someone, they own the clinic. Yeah. And then they need supervision.
They end up like wanting to become a BCBA, so then they want, supervision.
One of their BCBAs that are working for them to do it, correct?
Them. Yep. Okay. Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, the chances of that, I feel like, are pretty slim, but you never know.
Keep in mind, that's
it might have happened. That's why it's in there.
I'm sure it had to have, honestly.
All right. So let's go into the multiple supervisors and settings.
Yes.
So we and also like everyone else encourages trainees to have multiple supervisors across various settings.
Yeah.
I know it's not always ideal to leave the place you're working at, but try to get experience with different clients, different experiences, like type of fieldwork you're getting, like the
you want a very
a
broad experience. You want to experience a lot of different things so that you are familiar and learn different things that you want to incorporate as a BCBA.
And then if you are comfortable, it's okay to go out and seek different experiences. Like if you want to work in a school, then work in a clinic, try it in home.
Do insurance.
Do insurance. Like all of those experiences will just make you a better BCBA, and then you'll get different experiences from all your supervisors as well.
Yeah,
and then you'll also hopefully have like the competency to like provide that to trainees going forward as well, if you were in that spot.
Right. So we have like the individual supervisors. So the individual supervisor is like they ensure that all fieldwork requirements are met, maintain a clear supervision contract, and obtain written permission to access client information. And then the supervisor must sign off on all relevant documentation confirming that all fieldwork requirements were fulfilled. And kind of talking about this documentation, just while it's like on our mind, you have to keep your documentation from like anything relating to like your BCBA role for 7 years. Keep it.
Do not keep it. I put mine in a box. It's at home, hopefully.
Yeah, and
nothing happens to it.
Nothing happens. It's like in my I have my little file drawer. It's just to ensure that like the quality of care, you have everything you need, and then if you are audited by the BACB, you really want these documents. It's important to maintain.
Correct. And then I also had this contract. I know when you first get into it, like contracts seem a little confusing.
Yeah, it's hard.
But go out, research some. If you're the supervisor, and this is your first time creating one, and no one else around you has, like, do some research. Look up what could be in there. I feel like we've seen this like revised so many times throughout our experiences and our times. Where like I'm thinking of like things that have come up like. At a point, we added, like, must maintain, like, was it a grade point or something? Like
it was, no, it was, like, their standard, what is it? Like, their standard as an employee. So they had to, like, have good standing with us in order to be a supervisee. Like, they couldn't have certain time, like, if they called out often. We just wanted to make sure that they were a quality candidate to be receiving supervision hours from us.
And I think also remembering you can go back and change it, but all parties need to sign the form.
Yes, all parties need to sign the form. And then within the BCBA handbook, it does note what is required specifically within the contract. So when you are completing your contracts, if it's the first one, make sure first to refer to the BCBA handbook. And then in addition to that, add what you feel may be necessary.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. And then also there can be multiple supervisors at one organization. We've touched on this.
Yeah.
I said it's probably a good idea to get that experience, but remember that organizations can coordinate multiple supervisors for a trainee. So this requires a well-organized supervision contract listing all the supervisors' roles and responsibilities. Yes. You can find this form, I believe, like right on the website as well.
Yep, it's right there within the same ones.
And then all supervision must be related to client programming, and supervisors must have written permission to access client information again. So I only had every time was one main. Did you ever have more than? No, you didn't either.
Right? I had one main that I started. She left, and then I had my second main supervisor who did the majority of mine.
And then because I was at a clinic, they were creating their fieldwork program as I was in it.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it was like, okay, yeah, you have your person, your one, but then we added the multiple. Yeah. And then we went and got contracts signed by every BCBA that was at center. Yeah. So that we were able to say I wanted experience with an FBA or something, and my BCBA didn't have that. They didn't have a client I could do it with, or they didn't need it yet. They could reach out to the other BCBAs and say hey, my student wants experience with this. So they were also I was able to meet with that person and go over it with them.
Okay, I really like that. Was there anything about having multiple supervisors that you found challenging, tricky to navigate, or for a supervisor to keep in mind?
I think what was hard for me was I wanted to please each one. Yeah. And try to figure out my person, the person I'm used to, would have approved this, but say you were my supervisor, Kirsten likes this. Yeah. So being confident, the skills you are learning, you are still your own person. It's okay, you're learning skills to try to figure out the way you want to do things there too, and talk about it and collaborate, and not so much be I want to fit their mold, so I'm going to do it this way. Yeah. I wish I did that.
I think that honestly that's really tricky, as the supervisee. Something that I'm finding not difficult necessarily, but as a supervisor in a area where we have multiple supervisors for students, is the documentation for the contracts.
Oh, everyone's a little.
Yeah, so if you are a supervisor, one of the multiple supervisors, you may have your one student or two students, but then you're still supervising any candidate that is at your company or within your practice. What's hard is in order to supervise them, each of the multiple supervisors have to have the contract. Yeah. So it's on me to make sure, okay, before before say Yousra has a supervisee, before Yousra signs off on the supervisee's hours, Kirsten has to make sure she has a contract with the supervisee before she can count those hours.
I don't think I've been there long. I was
encountered that.
I'd never encountered that. I just came off the brand new BCBA status where I needed a consulting supervisor, so I haven't had to go through that yet.
So that is something that I'm remembering. It's okay, I need to make sure, and we're really lucky
because the main supervisor is the one that ends up signing that month, the last verification.
Yes, your final verification form, and typically your monthly verification forms as well. But in order to have counted your supervision with other supervisors, you still have to have a contract with them.
And this was confusing, I think, when we were signing off on my hours at the end. We were does everyone sign it?
Who is doing what?
Because I had 8. Yeah. Because we're 8 at ours. So does 8 people sign this? And then after digging, we were no.
I do want to refer back to one of our previous episodes. We had Taylor Ross and Kosai Zaya. Oh my gosh, did I pronounce it incorrectly?
Zaya? Yeah. So this is sad. Kosai was my supervisor.
We love you, Kosai. How do you say your last name? But please go back and watch that episode because we did discuss how we've kind of enhanced this experience within our setting. We established having a fieldwork coordinator. So that person kind of organizes and makes sure all of the students have contracts. They make sure that assignments with the BCBA and the supervisees is it's going to work. So
it's effective, evidence-based. Yeah. They're getting the experience that they need. They're learning their soft skills. They're learning everything from the task list. There's a lot on there, and I feel a thing we've learned or people have reported to us is the experience they get is usually just what the BCBA is going through versus the big round, a well-rounded experience is what I'm trying to say. They don't get the well-rounded experience, but they kind of get whatever's on their BCBA's caseload. Yeah. Which can be hard.
It's hard. Or it might not be a good fit, you know. So it's
also as the BCBA, I've always struggled with what do I give them to do? Sure. In my head is I got these programs for them to write.
And it's like, we don't want to just be giving program writing, but it's like, those are what's going to assist us most. So it's like finding
That's where you
balance.
get in the funk, I feel like, too.
Yeah.
People get in the funk. They're like, well, we need this stuff done. We got a student.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's have them do this instead.
Yes. So we have a fieldwork coordinator who helps organize and like maintain all of the requirements and things like that. I wanted to pause quickly for our first code word. Code word 1 for your CEUs is student.
All right. Okay. So transitioning in, we kind of discussed the consulting supervisor role.
Yeah.
And then consultation for newer BCBAs.
Yeah.
This is if you're a BCBA that's certified for less than
1 year.
Yeah. So if you're a BCBA certified for less than 1 year, you need to have a consulting supervisor to take any students on.
Yes. And this supervisor, they are required to be, they do monthly consultation, and they have to be certified as a BCBA for over 5 years. And then their focus areas. So what you're going to be focusing on during these monthly meetings is we want to make sure there's ethical decision making happening, supervision, best practices, and then documentation, of course, feedback, and professional growth. So the consulting supervisor is just ensuring that the newer BCBA is able to provide that quality experience for the supervisee to ensure that they are getting the best experience that they can.
And then because one thing, I was the person that needed a consulting supervisor.
Yeah.
So one part of my experience that I enjoyed about this was because we had a fieldwork coordinator, they had a checklist that was made for the newer BCBA to kind of go through all of this to make sure they even had those skills. Are they even, it wasn't like, oh, we need someone, so here's a consulting supervisor and you take on a student. It was like, is this person really ready? And then we can provide them with the support.
Yes.
So they had a checklist essentially of everything the student would need to learn. Could I even go through that with them? And then if there wasn't, we went through it.
Yeah.
It was just kind of like they checked to make sure I knew what I was doing.
They checked in.
Yeah.
And something kind of going on that, and this is just like a side personal note. If you are a new BCBA, I want you to feel confident in yourself to know if you're ready or not ready to take on a student.
You don't have to.
You should never have to take on a student if you don't feel like you are going to be able to provide them their quality experience. So
this is why I feel like the rule was created. I don't know why the rule was, but I have a feeling.
This is our personal take.
I do not know why they decided to do this. I didn't go look that up.
Personal take.
Hot take. But I have a feeling it was because there was this trend where brand new BCBAs were taking on students, and they didn't even know what they were doing yet.
They're still learning. And I remember being a brand new BCBA. I was like, oh my God, I just need to navigate and figure out what I'm doing first.
And then, so this is why it's here. It's for a good reason.
It is.
And if you're in the place where you're like, wow, I don't want to be supervised by someone, it's okay. Take it.
Yeah, it is.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Yes, we all need mentorship, even as BCBAs who have been experienced for more than a year. I still seek guidance from consulting BCBAs. It's really important.
And honestly, let's go right into the format. The format of it isn't too bad. It's a one-on-one meeting where you're reviewing the practices and case-specific support.
Yeah.
So I remember my supervisor had, we had a checklist, a little, just like if you were a student getting supervision, we had documentation that we also have to keep for 7 years.
All of your documentation, 7 years.
just like before. But it had to be for at least 1 hour per month. And then this had to continue until I hit my 1 year mark.
Okay.
And then we also had a contract.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to, but we had one.
We had to. It's recommended by the BACB, but it's not
This
mandatory.
is where people get confused. I had one. And then the purpose of it was really, the purpose of our meetings was to guide and enhance the supervision quality that I was providing.
Yeah.
Not that I was getting. That I was providing to my students. And then the content really was basic strategies, problem solving, and refining any tasks that I needed or wanted to give to my students.
Yeah.
So a lot of it would be let me give. We can't talk about Johnny. He's a client. We need a fake student name.
Who is our fake student? Joey? No, I don't like the J.
Let's just name it Rachel.
Rachel.
We have Rachel. She's our student, and that's my student. And then say you're my consulting supervisor.
Okay.
So in our meetings, I would go and I'd be like, hey, well, Rachel has been sharing she doesn't feel confident in her soft skills.
Yep.
I don't know what I can do for her. And then maybe you would give me some ideas
So I would meet with you and I would say, here are some things that you can do to build her soft skills. Before doing this, I would talk about this in your meetings.
Right. And then also sometimes I didn't need like support or I felt like I knew what I was doing. So I'd just be like, hey, Kirsten, Rachel did such a great job training one of our new hires today. I told her she's doing great, and I think she's ready for the next
and everything was behavior analytic in nature.
Yep. And then she's ready for her next assignment. And then we would go over that.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was just updates and like making sure that I was giving like proper or quality supervision. Yeah. Sometimes I was seeking support.
I was going to say, ensuring that you're supported.
Yep.
It's really the main.
So honestly, I really liked my meetings.
I know. I'm like, dang, I want to be new again. I miss those.
Am I missing anything?
No, you're not missing anything. You got like the main content. There's like, we talked a little bit about the responsibilities of the consulting supervisor themselves. So guidance, they again provide support and ensure adherence to the BACB code of ethics. That's really number one. And then liability. They're not responsible for the new supervisor's work, but they must ensure ethical conduct. So if I'm your consulting supervisor, it's not on me, like, if you are doing unethical practices, but it's on me to ensure, like, that you learn the ethical practices to help your supervisee. No. Yousra, there's a couple more things that I wanted to mention regarding like the structure of the consulting supervisor's role with the BCBA. Okay. That's been a BCBA for less than a year. You didn't forget anything. We just have a lot of notes on this topic. So the number one thing, and these are just recommendations from the BACB, not necessarily requirements, but the consulting BCBA is responsible for ensuring that that there's a supervision curriculum followed by the new BCBA. And you also, as the consulting BCBA, are responsible for ensuring that BCBA is providing effective supervision to their candidate. We kind of touched on that, but that is like one of the number one things. We want to make sure it's an effective relationship. And then finally, as a new BCBA, it's really hard to like be organized and have time management skills. So the consulting BCBA will help the new BCBA develop those skills to be an effective supervisor.
And I know we touched on this. I just want to talk about it a little bit more. We talked about the documentation that we need to keep for 7 years between the new BCBA and the consulting supervisor. But I had both. So I had like a little sheet that we kept all our notes on with every single detail of what we talked about. And then also what's required of you is I had to pull it up because I did not fit it onto my note card. It's on the BACB website. You'll find it. It's the consultating supervision documentation. So really the name of the new BCBA, the new supervisor certification number, the date they were certified. Because remember, they have to be a BCBA for 5 years. And then on there, it's like the month and year that you met, because you have to meet every month. And then if fieldwork hours are provided by the new supervisor, yes or no. And then just your name and the certification number. And I think you sign, you sign right. There's a little line under there, so you miss it. You might think it's at the bottom. But.
Yes, don't forget to sign it. And then this is typically the responsibility of the consulting supervisor to maintain this documentation. It's on both of you to have it, but typically the consulting supervisor will like start it and help you like keep up with it as a new supervisor.
Cool. So let's get into it. So say you're not a new one.
You've been a BCBA for more than a year. You are qualified.
What's still required of you?
You had to have completed the supervision course.
Which both of them had to do, right?
Yes. Yep. So these are required of both the not a new BCBA, so a BCBA for more than a year, and then a BCBA of a year or less. So they have to complete the BACB 8-hour supervision course. There are a few different ones that you can find online. Some provide CEUs, some don't, but you have to complete that before being a supervisor. You also have to do your ongoing CEU. So you must fulfill ongoing supervision CEU requirements. We talk about this often. And then your compliance. You cannot have disciplinary sanctions. You must have prior supervisory experience as well.
And if you don't, get some help.
Yes.
Tell someone, make sure you're competent in it.
This is when you seek out like a consulting supervisor.
That's if you're over a year and you've never done supervision
Yes,
before.
you have never supervised and had any experience with that. The documentation, proficient in session documentation and fieldwork management. So some of these are assessed skills. You have to know, like, within yourself, are you able to provide proficient documentation of your sessions that are happening with your clients? And then, like, your fieldwork management. Can you handle
You have to do
this?
it for someone else.
Yeah, this is your job. It's your responsibility. You are responsible for your supervisee.
Yep.
And then resources, access to and navigation of supervision resources. A lot of these are found within the BACB website. They have a lot of resources for us. Use those at your discretion.
All right.
And then professional growth, continuous engagement, and professional development. Keep up with your CEUs. Keep up with what's going on in the field.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything that's up, keep up to date with what's going on.
Yes, it's important.
So, kind of just a question. How have you, I know, we have the silly little podcast.
Yeah.
So we're just kidding. But we're trying to maintain our growth. Are there
Yeah.
any other things that you've done as a supervisor or as a BCBA to help you grow?
Yeah. Something that, especially when I was a new BCBA, because I love research. Research is like my thing.
Yeah.
I like to keep up with it. Something that I was doing when I was just wanting to know, like, more and more about, like, what practices were happening, what changes were happening in the field is every 2 weeks I would read, like, an article from the BACB. Like, you know how on the BACB website on your portal you can access, like, articles and resources? I would find the new ones that are up to date, and I would try and read one every 2 weeks and just, like, take notes on it and keep up to date that way, as well as obviously, like, my main CEUs and things like that.
See, for that, the response effort is too high for me.
You don't like it?
I can't go through 2 or 3 things to get on. First of all, the BACB website.
I don't want to talk about it.
It's super slow, so it takes me forever to get there. And then to go on there and then get on another website and then write in keywords to find an article is really hard for me.
Yeah.
Something that I've started to do is I've followed reputable accounts
Oh my gosh.
on social media that do a really good job of finding those articles, so that's a little bit easier for me to access them, or they're discussing these things, so I'm able to find it there, and then I can get to what I need to see.
I wish I knew the account's name. It's like, I think it's like Melanie. I don't know her name on Instagram. I wish maybe we'll tag it in the description. She would break down articles monthly. Like, she would do like a live where she would, like, talk about articles that she's read, and she would break it down monthly and, like, have, like, a little live where you could, like, talk in the chat and stuff, and I really liked that too.
I feel like this is a little bit newer where there weren't this many accounts before.
Yeah.
Like, when I was a student, I don't think there were that many accounts that I could follow and get.
That
like,
felt
information.
reputable.
Yeah, there were a lot of, like fun.
They were newer,
fun
learning
accounts, but not so much providing education.
Yeah.
But I feel like especially now on, like, LinkedIn, I can go on every morning on LinkedIn and I'll learn one new thing.
Yeah.
Or I'll read one new thing about something that's happening.
Yeah, I agree. I really love that we have, like, so many resources now.
Makes it a little easier
social
to get
media
there.
life.
Makes us a little easier to access that information.
It does. This is, like, the sad part.
Yeah.
So there's, like, some things, the negativity we have to talk about, the consequences of non-compliance with these requirements. There would be disciplinary actions if you don't meet these requirements. It may lead to certification restrictions. You could lose your certification. You might not be able to supervise. You might have, like, practice restrictions.
Or a violation.
Or a violation. And then reporting. So non-compliance may also result in the violation notice.
Yeah.
So.
And then just remember, they're auditing all the time. You don't know. You could be pulled in an audit.
You could be the next week.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're probably watching this. Like, look to see who watched it. So they can
Maybe.
get you.
Exactly. So, yeah, just really stay up to date. Know the changes that are occurring, because there are often changes, like requirements and things that change very, very frequently. So,
And I know this is the part where I feel like all jokes aside, I feel very anxious about sometimes.
Oh my gosh, it
it's
makes
like
me so nervous.
It's changed so much even since I was a student. Not that, like, a lot. It's like small little.
It hasn't even been that
There's
long.
small little details, but then I know what my supervisor's experience was, and then I know what my coworkers' experiences were, and I feel like sometimes it just gets jumbled.
it gets lost as to, like, what is the, like,
Correct
effective
way.
real way.
Yeah. And then also, we'll talk about this one later. I think this is a good story for later.
Okay, I'll save it. Stay tuned.
So I want to also, now you know what the requirements are for yourself, if you're the supervisor, and maybe if you're the student, some requirements you should look for in your supervisor, the different types of supervisors there are. So we have multiple supervisors.
Yeah.
And am I missing multiple supervisors, the single
Consulting
supervisors.
supervisor. Supervisors that have been less than 1 year, more than 1 year, and then your supervisee.
Yep.
Also known as student.
All right.
Yeah.
So kind of went over everything. I don't think we're missing anything.
Not yet.
We might hit some more things later on. But let's shift gears a little bit and let's start talking about another thing that caused me a lot of anxiety is like once I had my first student, like what do I do now? Like,
you're like, oh my God, I'm assigned a student.
And I know you have your consulting supervisor.
Yeah.
But you know, try to get your gears
You're still
moving.
independent. I'm like, I want to be an independent queen, okay?
Yeah. So let's start thinking about what you should have ready, things you should require your student to have for their next meeting.
Yeah. So my first meeting with my students is really about setting the expectations of like our relationship, their role as my student, and what that's going to look like for them. So at my first meeting, I always make sure that one, we have our contract signed. And then I discuss with them like the requirements of your monthly verification form. So each month you need to sign your monthly verification form. I tell them about it. And I always like, I'm trying to build independence with them as well. So I let them know, I'm like, it's on you to fill out your monthly verification form and remember it.
I'm not going to seek it out.
Yeah, I'm not going to seek it out. I'm not going to be able to remember that this one's on you. And they know to bring it to me, and then it's within the 30 days. So like at the end, say I'm signing a monthly verification form for June, you have 30 days after the end of June. So you can get it signed by July 31st or 30th, whatever the last day is. So I always discuss that with them. I get a contract signed, and then I let them know like what I would expect of them, like when bringing things to all future meetings. So I always ask, I set up, like we have our meeting notes, and I'm like, you need to bring an agenda, and I will bring an agenda. Just so that, again, I'm building like responsibility on them, their independence, they're learning like how to host a meeting.
My supervisor also did this with me where I had like the autonomy of like picking what to add to the agenda, which I felt like was very helpful. Like anything I thought of during my like sessions, I was able to add. When I had my first student, I decided to do the same thing. Yeah. One thing that, you know, I did set the I did tell them this is what I wanted. What was happening is they were forgetting to fill it out, not doing it, and then we were coming in.
It's hard.
Yeah. So I was coming in with the meeting with a lot of ideas and to talk about, but they weren't.
Right.
So then, like, reevaluating, like, hey, like, if you don't do this, it's not going to be like this well-rounded experience
and
for you.
In this meeting too, like I always schedule it in an hour because it's a lot to talk about, and like I'm trying to build rapport with them too. I've probably
You're not trying to be mean, like, hey, this is everything I expect of you, but also trying to like what's your style? This is my style.
Exactly. Like learning like how they receive feedback best and things like that. But at this meeting, I'm telling them, I'm like, your supervisee experience is going to be what you make it. So it can be the most fantastic.
I feel like it's like a scare tactic too, a little bit.
It is
because you know we're doing our jobs too. Like if they aren't thinking about seeking something, we're still going to provide them with that experience.
Exactly.
But you should start looking into what you want.
So when I have this conversation, I always tell them, so I'm like, it's going to be what you make it. So, but I do have, we have our, oh my gosh, what did we call it earlier? It's like the
checklist?
It's kind of a checklist, like a baseline skills and your checklist. So I have this, and they have access to this too within their like practicum folder. So they know what opportunities are available to them, and we break it down. I think we'll probably talk about this later.
Levels, right?
We break it down in levels. So this is what you should accomplish within your first 500 hours. These are the skills we'll target later.
And it's not crazy stuff. It's very. I wonder if we can link it later.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, it's very simple stuff like your first couple months, this is what you need to know, and it's nothing crazy. We're not asking you to complete an assessment from start to finish. Simple stuff like, can you define reinforce?
Yeah.
And then, like, if you don't know it, that's okay, because now we have baseline, and you know this is something you need to seek out now.
Exactly. And these are things that mostly relate to their job as a technician. So we start with things that they're going to be doing on their daily basis as a one-to-one tech with kiddos. And then it, like, the skills gradually build on there. So,
and by the end, the checklist is built so by the end, you can be a fully functioning BCBA.
There are some things on the, like, last 500 hours that I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have done that. I think some of them are, like, has experience with, like, terminating staff member, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I never did that.
And then I was in I worked here while I was a student, so this checklist wasn't created until after I was a BCBA. So I had to do it with my consulting supervisor. Yeah. So, and I was like,
wait a minute.
So I was like, are we going to go fire someone? And,
who are we seeking out?
And we didn't do that. We did role play it, though. So you can create, like, not everything is going to happen naturally, and you might not be able to drive it either sometimes. So in those situations, we role played.
Yes. So kind of like got off, but that's kind of what like my first meeting looks like. Do you have like experience with your first meeting of like things that you loved or things you've changed as you've been a BCBA for a little while?
I think just reminding them that we were in their spots
Yeah.
is helpful. Like, yeah, we were students. This is what I usually tell them what I liked about my experience. And, I hope to bring that to their experience.
Yeah.
But, if there's anything they want, like, they can also give me feedback that I'm okay with that. They can let me know they want something changed.
I think that's something that we don't necessarily learn in school, or it's not like a requirement from the BACB, so it's not something that we necessarily target directly, but I think you and I have had the experience to practice, like, it isn't a safe environment for the supervisee to be practicing providing feedback. Like, we are accepting feedback in these meetings. It's important for us.
Right. I don't think there's anything else. We got our contract signed.
Yep.
We went over the contract. We discussed the monthly supervision forms.
And now...
Also, actually, I remembered something. How we're keeping track of our hours, because that's a really important thing, too. Yeah, along with the monthly supervision form, we need our hours documented.
Tell me about it.
So... depending on who you are, where you're at, some places have their own trackers where they're tracking hours.
They also have the Ripley, our good old famous Ripley.
That wasn't around when I was a student.
Me either. I'm so jealous.
They love it, and that's what a lot of my students use.
Me too.
I bought one off of, I forget what I bought. ABC, I don't know. One of the websites, there was a tracker.
When I was a student, the BACB had one that we were required.
And then they stopped using it.
And then they stopped. They're like, just kidding. Don't use
it. Didn't work.
It wasn't very, it was hard.
So, also... learned saying hey, we need to pick one, let's
track
it. And then I used to also say along with your monthly verification forms, I want a copy of it so I can see make sure everything's looking good.
I kept mine in my students folder, so then when they send me their MVF, I'm like, okay, I need to cross track.
And then I got to be did I really
did I provide the supervision?
And did I give you this task, or just making sure everything is checked. And also reminding them, if they're choosing their tracker, it is their responsibility.
Yes.
Because this was the funny, silly story I thought of.
Gosh, okay, tell me. Oh, no.
There was an incident. I don't know if it was here or just in my brain.
Yes. Okay.
But there was a student, and they had a tracker that they got from a friend.
Yep.
I can't remember, coworker, friend.
Yeah,
but essentially, the tracker didn't work. They didn't check it. Oh. So at the end of all their hours, he thought, or she thought, they were done. And... they weren't.
And they weren't. So you got to the end and you were check.
So once the supervisor, it wasn't me. This is a story. It happened.
A history. Good old history.
But she checked it, or he checked it. Someone realized that the hours were off, and upset at the supervisor, so upset at his friend. But I think after that, I learned reminding them it's on you to make sure everything's working smoothly.
Yes. We can check it.
We're going to check it. We can troubleshoot it if it's not working. I'll help you figure it out. But it is not anyone else's.
These are your hours.
These are your hours.
Do you want your hours tracked?
Please keep up with the requirements.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And then
that's so sad.
I know, it's so sad.
Yeah.
And then
so these requirements.
These are requirements. Make sure your tracker works.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something I want to start adding to my...
You're now on us as supervisor. You're okay, this is on my supervisor
And now
checklist.
I know that sometimes they don't work either.
We all learn. We're learning at BCBAs. Do you have any other fieldwork requirements that you can think of?
For myself?
That, requirements from the BACB that we should be looking at?
Documentation.
Yeah.
Making sure the hours are met. So if you're supervised, you're hitting the... Do you remember the unrestricted, restricted numbers?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I know we want to do a whole nother episode based off of the requirement.
So we're going to talk about brief overview of your role as a supervisor. Maybe on one of our mini-sodes, I will touch on some of those detailed requirements.
So you got to have the right percentages of restricted and unrestricted based off of your fieldwork experience.
Yep.
Making sure that's up, you know what that is. So this is something you'll probably go over in your contract too. Make sure it's in your contract. So you'll go over all of that. Contract, documentation, number of hours, how they're giving it to you, the agenda of the meetings, how you're keeping track of that.
I think we hit it all.
And if you forget something and you think of something, just tell them as soon as you know.
Yes, exactly. And then we also wanted to talk about communication protocols. I know you have a lot of experience with this. You're very clear at communicating and so I feel like you set good standards and expectations. So can you touch on that, the communication with your supervisee?
So really just telling them, hey, I'm busy Sunday nights. I do not work. Well, this is just an example. Setting that boundary. I'm busy Sunday nights. If you send me all your assignments or you're asking me for assignments on the weekend because you're free that day, I'm not going to respond to you. Probably not going to respond to you. Please contact me for these times. Yeah. Just reminding them, like, hey, I'm a person. You know, I'm here. I usually am here for emergencies and anything you may need. I'm also a person. I'm compassionate.
But you're also trying to set your firm boundaries for yourself.
Yeah. And I feel like this one is, like, a little tricky because it's happened where people have reached out, like, hey, like, you know, students, especially in the beginning, are free on the weekends because they got school all the time.
Yeah, and they're doing their hours on the weekend. They're doing everything.
So on the weekends, you're getting a lot of messages like, hey, can I have an assignment? Hey, I finished this. Do you have anything else I can do? But the thing is, on Saturday, I'm usually out and I don't have my laptop with me. So if you're trying to get an assignment, I'm probably not going to be able to get you until later that evening.
So knowing those boundaries and like having like a time frame. Something else is like during that communication conversation, you want to talk about like
when we're assigning things
and then your like feedback. So it's like, how does this person receive feedback as a supervisor? So this is something I do currently with my supervisees. I really want to know how they best receive feedback. When do they want it? Do they want it in the moment or after? Like if I'm doing direct supervision with a client. But if I'm like providing assignment feedback, do they want me to go over the feedback in our meeting? Do they want me to
scribble all over it?
I do a lot of written feedback, but I've found that some supervisees, they do best if I describe it to them in person. So just having those conversations ahead of time and establishing that so that if you do run into a situation where like somebody might not be receptive to feedback, you can troubleshoot if it's like on us as the supervisor. Did we do something that they don't understand?
Well, that's a good one. I like that.
Have you ever experienced where like a supervisee might not have been receptive to feedback or like it was kind of tricky?
Honestly, I was very lucky with my students. I think all of them were very receptive of the feedback. But I can think of a situation where my supervisor had to give me feedback.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And it was just like, I felt like she did a good job of like doing it.
Yeah.
But it was like tricky. Like, I feel like
it hurt.
It just hurt. But like, you know, hey, like she was very direct. And I think she knew that's how I received feedback. I liked it in the moment. It was I felt like it was a good way, and I felt like I knew how to handle if I had to do it to someone.
Yeah. Oh, you had to learn from that. I want to touch on our code word number 2 is actually feedback.
Oh, okay. So have you actually had to provide anyone feedback like that?
I'm trying to think of any like direct feedback that might have like not been maybe received negatively or felt harsh. I'm really trying to think.
Or maybe I was harsh and I just didn't know. I hope not.
Oh my God, what if we're too direct? No. I actually do have, going with feedback. This wasn't one of my direct supervisees, but it's one of the students that I work with. I had heard from another person that sometimes when I was in the moment addressing like behaviors with learners, like I'm very direct in my supervision, almost cold. And I didn't realize it. I thought I was going in and just like guiding through the behavior plan and just being like, these are the expectations. If somebody wasn't necessarily following the behavior plan, I'm very clear with like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is why, let's do it. And I guess I didn't approach warmly. And I heard from another technician, like, you know, sometimes you might come in a little strong and people are intimidated when you come to support with behaviors. So that's a feedback that I was provided and I had to improve on. And I didn't realize, I'm like, okay, when I go in for behaviors, and I never intended it. Like when I go into support, I'm never like thinking that the tech's doing anything wrong or anything.
You're just trying to guide them through it.
I was just I'm very direct. So I needed to be less direct.
Aww. And I feel like this is a hard one though, right?
It is, yeah.
There's always, every situation's unique and you'll figure it out as you go, but just remembering to change your process. If your student needs something different, change it up.
It's on us.
If you've provided them with feedback, and honestly, like I'm saying, I don't know, did I deliver it in a way that was receptive? Were they not receptive to it?
Yeah.
Reminding them like, hey, if it's not working, you can come to me.
Yeah, and like that's okay. Like if you don't hear this or if like, it's not supporting you.
Or if you don't understand or if it hurt, not if it hurt your feelings, but if you are unclear to why it was said.
Or if you don't appreciate the way that it was said or where it was said. Like, you know, you don't want to provide it in the wrong context. Maybe somebody overheard and they felt embarrassed.
So, like, providing those means of, like, hey, like, I'm trying to be, like, compassionate, empathetic with you, same with me. But if the situation were to ever arise, that way you have, like, the middle, like, you know what the other person needs or wants.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
All right. So we just went through, have you ever...
We talked about feedback a little bit. Like next we'll be talking about baseline skills.
Okay. So we talked about this a little bit. In the first meeting, sometimes I'll have them take it home because it's very long.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a few things with this,
Like here, we have one at the center that we've used that they've like established throughout the fieldwork experience here.
Yeah.
It's essentially like every task list item, bunch of other soft skills that you may need. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go through and rate it yourself on that scale. I used it when I was a student too, and I think they just modified it. Yeah. I thought it was really helpful to be like, oh crap, I don't know any of this.
Like, shoot, I didn't realize.
Yep. So, and then if I give it to my students, they also see that. But then I take that and I'm like, okay, like, look, now we have a starting point. Like, say, what if they're really good at, like, all those level 1, level 2 skills?
Yeah.
My first thing is, like, okay, they said they can do it. Maybe let's check. Let's assess it. Can they do it? Can they talk about it? Can they...
Yes. Model it.
What's
that word?
And then after that, we can move on to the next skill. Say, because some people may know how to do it or talk about it, but not be able to do the skill.
I want to talk about assessing the skill really quick. I have this beautiful book. And I got this as a gift when I graduated my program. And it's called the ABA Supervision Handbook. Mine is a little outdated. Mine is with the previous task list. But they have the updated one for the current task list and the future task list that's coming out. They're going to create a new one. Ooh. I'm obsessed with this book. It is created, it's an assessment tool for students. And it breaks it down similar.
I've never seen this.
It breaks it down similar to the ABLES assessment. And so
so Kirsten, rate yourself. Can you collaborate with others who support and or provide services to other clients? So go ahead, rate yourself. 1 through 4.
I rate myself a 4.
Oh, okay. So who are you collaborating with?
I collaborate with my SLPs, the OTs. I have previous history with collaborating with mental health professionals. I reach out to schools and pediatricians.
Oh, nice. Okay, so that's great. So we have our little friend that we share. I have a meeting with his SLP next week. Why don't you come and you can talk about all of the things you've seen in our session and ask her if you have any questions.
Wonderful. That sounds great.
That might be a good way to like. She's rated that was a 4. Yeah. Now I want to see can she
do it. So what I love about this book though, it breaks it down and it tells you like what the expectation is. So it's like supervisee is able to identify and collaborate with all necessary stakeholders and individuals outside of the field of ABA, such as like SLPs, OTs, teachers, etc. But it breaks it down measurably. And as BCBAs, we know we love a measurable criteria. So I am obsessed with that book. I will link it down below. The editors, if you want to send me a new copy for the new task list, I would love it.
And me.
And Yousra too.
I'm here too.
And then something else that I do with my students with like the rating. So we have like that rating scale that we have for our students, but I just provide them explicitly with the task list that they are achieving. So like currently the task list 6 is my students. And she, like, I have her rate herself 1 to 3 on all of the task list items as well, because I found that a lot of students don't realize, like, they are familiar with the content, but they don't have experience with it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. I like that. So I want to start talking about the nature of supervision. Okay. So this is, our jobs is to monitor their skills that they're like learning throughout their fieldwork experience. Okay. So there's different ways we could be doing this. So we could be monitoring their progress by watching them in session with their clients, which I feel like is the easiest, most common things that happen the most often. If you're lucky enough to work with the BCBA, you're getting in-person supervision. Yeah. There are people that are paying for their supervision outside or getting outside supervision, so they have videos that they're providing, making sure you got all the rules figured out for those.
Ethical considerations.
Yeah. But then kind of like making sure you're getting, if you are someone that's getting, say, the video or the other form, or telehealth supervision. Yes,
I did receive telehealth.
Making sure you get all forms of it. Yeah. If you're in that spot.
Yes. Like understanding those. I think that one of the hardest things with telehealth supervision is just feeling confident as the supervisee with the skills. So it's like only so much I feel like can be seen virtually. So as the supervisor using telehealth, you need to establish like assessing skills that
is it possible? Could you come in one day?
Yeah.
And supervise? Or if you are, can you collaborate with other BCBAs in the center or where they're working, if they can go in and supervise? That might be helpful.
And I think this is one of the new requirements that'll be changing within 2026 as well. Like you have to be like within the same location.
I think
it's changing.
I think it's a good one.
Things are changing.
Yeah. And then also, is there anything else you wanted to touch on that?
Kind of just like with monitoring your training skills, just do regular check-ins to discuss like the skill development.
Maybe going back to that baseline sheet we filled out. Checklist. Hey, like where are we feeling?
I try and assess it like at their like when their seasons change for school. So if they're in a new semester, at the end of their semester, I will assess where they are standing.
And I think one thing that changed, like while I had a student, was the fieldwork coordinator was also meeting with the students here, checking in on their hours, but also checking in on all of this stuff. Like, hey, is there anything you're missing out on?
That's why I love that we have a fieldwork coordinator, because it's like a double system for that supervisee. They are like, they don't necessarily say they might be having a negative experience. They also have a second person to be like, I'm not getting any of the experiences on this task list. I need something to change, kind of thing. So it just checks us.
Checks and balances.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rules.
Yes.
There's a lot of nuances that we have to make sure that we're like reaching, that we hit all the requirements. So it's good to have that.
Yes, checks and balances.
All right, next I wanted to talk about setting and communicating performance expectations.
Okay.
Just like our clients, we should set specific measurable goals for the trainee, such as mastering a particular behavior, intervention technique. So say, I'm trying to teach you how to train tech.
Okay.
Or provide supervision to a tech,
Yeah.
Providing a clear goal for that.
Yeah, what would be my observable, measurable goal?
Kirsten. I don't know why I wanted to call you Rachel, because I had Rachel will. Kirsten will provide positive feedback to a technician 3 times during one observation session.
Okay.
Is that good? Am I missing anything?
No.
I like to have things written.
I'm trying to think. I'm like thinking about it visually. I'm like, what's my mastery criteria? 3 times per session. Across how many times?
Across, let's say, 3 sessions. Because I can get you 3 sessions.
That's easy to do.
I would say maybe more.
Yeah.
But then also, can Kirsten provide... do I want to say negative? I'm thinking
constructive?
Constructive. Yeah, I'm like thinking positive, negative reinforcement. Can Kirsten provide constructive feedback to technician, same, on 3 occasions during a session or 3 consecutive sessions?
Perfect. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, just something observable. And I think that it's just really important we are BCBAs. We think of things in data, so we shouldn't lack that within our students as well. I also really like to set measurable goals for like how many assessments that they'll complete. Like I don't want to send my supervisee out into the BCBA world, like say they've never done an initial assessment or like they've only done one VB map, but they've never done it independently or other assessments. You're right. So like I set just like goals for them like that. Like my student, those
are easier, not my crazy ones that I just made up.
I do love those because I like soft skill goals. I think those are lacking a little bit. But I do set like expectations for like my assessments and things like that. So just think about what well-rounded BCBAs you want to create and enhance.
And that's why maybe going over a supervision curriculum, having one, discussing it with your clinical director or fieldwork coordinator if you have one, or a new BCBA, a consulting supervisor, is so important to make sure you're hitting everything. There's a lot of skills that you could be teaching your student. There's going to be a lot of situations that come up. There's a lot of behavior analytic principles that you also need to learn along with the soft skills. Make sure you're hitting each and every one. All right, so let's go into the nature of supervision.
Yes.
I kind of touched on this already a little bit when trying to get like every type, like in person.
Yeah. So
I skipped a little.
Yeah, we got excited. We moved on. But like observing and providing feedback on trainee performance. So during your session, you want to take detailed notes on the trainee's performance. So always have like specific notes to work towards. Like your supervision shouldn't just be like, okay, I observed them. I can mark it off. You need to have like detailed notes for that supervision and what they could work towards, what they achieved, providing that positive feedback.
One thing is also like modeling what you're expecting a trainee to do. One thing I felt like was very hard, and I don't think anyone like meant harm for it, but like, hey, like you need a task to do, go write me a BIP.
Yeah.
But like
wait a minute.
like I've seen a BIP, but how do I write a BIP?
Yes.
And, you know, it might not be, you can't sit and watch someone write a BIP. Like, say it takes me 3 hours. But you can go over the main subjects. You're like, hey, like, this is what you need. This is how I do it. I sit myself down.
I break it down like a task list.
Yep.
Like, so I start with like, okay, I'm going to teach my student how to write some antecedent strategies. Okay, they've got that. I've taught them how to write a goal. Got that.
And then they put it all into one.
Put it together. Now, what are my reactive strategies? That kind of thing. A tip that I like to do is invite the trainee to observe you during like your specific client meetings, whether that be with like the parent or if you're meeting, like if you're supervising another learner that they don't have experience with and you're working on like a BIP or goals and things within your session, using that, like times that you're going to be working on those skills as opportunities for them to observe.
One thing that we've seen here and that like I've gotten the chance to do is like when I was being invited in on these like meetings, like supervision, was that slowly the goal was for me to first like observe and then slowly be the person like providing it. Yep.
Yes.
So then we can test like, do they have the ability to provide feedback? Are they able to think like behavior analytically and provide
shape their behavior?
Yeah, because that's hard too.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I mean, yeah, you would think they have all of these skills. They've learned about it in school.
They've developed it,
But in practice, you don't get to see a lot of, you see the behavior analytic principles being applied with a client, but not so much.
And their one-to-one technician role. I think it's hard for us sometimes to see them in like a BCBA setting. I really like that. That's a good point for them to acknowledge. We also want to guide the development of case conceptualization, problem solving, and decision-making skills. So presenting them with like complex cases to work through, and the trainee should be like working through it with you. And like if they get stuck, that's when you guide them, like model the process of developing like a treatment plan for difficult cases or a behavior plan for difficult cases, and encourage them to ask questions and offer like their ideas. Like don't just do it for them. Like if they get stuck, don't do it for them. I encourage my students to like go look back at their notes if I know that they've been working on this in school. Or, hey, where's your Cooper book?
Or if you were on your own, how would you figure it out?
Yes, exactly. Independence.
One tip that I have is like giving your student, when they're ready, a case to work on as like BCBA. So you're still supervising it, but they're like the mini BCBA essentially. So they're keeping up with all the program updates. They're making updates after they consult with you, of course. But then that's also the case that they might be in like supervision with you the most. That might be like they're writing the BIP for that client. They're making all necessary changes. So when a behavior occurs, you can be like, well, what do you want to do?
Exactly. Like you give them the autonomy to get to know a client in and out, like all the ins and outs of everything. I do this a lot of times. I have students who might be earlier in their experience and they don't have as much free time. Like they might be working like 38 hours a week directly with learners, so they don't have a lot of free time. So if they're assigned to one of my cases, I take a mini caseload as a learner that they're working with.
Oh, that's good.
And then I do reverse supervision, because a lot of the feedback that I've received recently from supervisees is that they're not getting enough opportunity to practice supervision because they are always teching.
Which is hard.
It's so hard. And like they feel like they're lacking that experience. So I ask to swap supervision with them. So I'm like, okay, I'm planning to supervise you on Wednesday 10 to 12. For 10 to 11, I'm going to be the tech and I want you to supervise me. I want you to guide me on these practices.
That's really good. And I feel like that is the hard thing.
It is, yeah.
And
the time.
It's nice that you're providing them, because you're a great supervisor with the experience. Because I feel like a lot of the times you hear like people just want you do the work for them.
Yeah, or
the
be
student,
their assistant.
be the assistant. But it is your job to shape this person to be a good
This is their experience to become
This is
a
your
BCBA.
baby.
This is my like child within the ABA world.
Exactly. So try remembering that and take on some of those like harder tasks, like being the tech. For the day.
And sometimes like it's
good for you.
And I find it fun. Like I'm like, I love teching. So I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have so many more ideas. Like sometimes we don't get that experience as often as we'd like.
Right. So another one I want to talk about is reviewing and providing feedback on written materials. We touched on this a little bit, but just kind of an example of this is after you reviewed a behavior plan with a trainee, provide specific feedback.
Okay.
So I know we can say like, you turned in this assignment or you turned in like
I give
this
you
program.
an assessment.
Yeah. You gave me an assessment. I could very easily say, looks good.
Done.
Done. Or I could say, it wasn't the best, but just leave it at that. That's not enough for this person to go out and change their behavior, right? So I need to tell them like, I liked how behavior-specific praise, right? Like, I liked how you did this right here. But then also say your language wasn't proper or something in a different section. Like,
I had to I had to make a lot of grammatical corrections to this
just showing them, like,
assessment.
look, I just made these changes here. Going forward, maybe be more mindful of your spelling. I was the student. Like, I cannot spell.
Still to this day, our text back and forth.
Yeah, like, if you're texting me, you're not going to get a good text. But, I remember I got the feedback, like, hey, like, grammar, make sure you're proofreading it once or twice.
Yeah.
And I was pretty mindful after that.
You're like, dang, I've heard it 3 times now. Got it.
But, we're all people. Like, we all know ourselves.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's helpful to just have it, like, especially, like, on those long behavior plans or assessments written out for you so you can go back and look at it.
And I like to have, like, a rubric for my for my supervisee. If they're doing an assignment, I don't just throw them in there blindly and be like, here you go. I have a rubric for them to follow so they know the guidelines, and then I refer back to that when I'm assessing it and, like, grading it.
Do you provide them with models? Like, hey, this is, like, an assessment I've done. Yeah. You can look at it.
I call it, my students know it as my Mickey Mouse assessment. So it's like I did it as a student, and it's like my most perfect assessment. I'm like, it's literally like everything that interns could ever want. So I have it as my template, and I'm like, this is like a perfect assessment and what you should be like looking for within like what it should look like.
And then also, I don't know what, speaking of assessments, it came to me like, but trying to, like when you're writing assessments, like one thing or something my supervisor told me was like, hey, remember who else is reading this? Yeah. Other than like parents are also reading these reports, like reminding them like, hey, it's not just me that's reading it. Like, insurance company's going to see this. Parents are going to see this. One thing I learned was like, don't say the cannot do.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because I used to write it like, as a student, I would write like, because when I would Google examples.
That's what you find.
That's what you find.
Yep.
So if this is something you want to shape in a person, telling them maybe like the why too. Like a parent might be reading this and you're telling them their child can't talk.
We're developing these soft skills within hard skills.
Yep. So maybe even writing that in your comments could be very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. We also want to oversee and evaluate the impact of the trainees' service delivery. Fancy terms. We want to track like a client progress under the trainees' guidance and review the data and supervision sessions with them. So showing that the decisions that they're making or the behavior that they're engaging in with their learner is resulting in effective results.
So cool. Like you decided you wanted to put in a replacement behavior for mouthing. Yep. And you provided them with the chewy.
Yep.
Let's look at the data, like, after you put in the phase change light for when the chewy's there. Yeah. Did it decrease the behavior?
Like, check it out.
Yeah. So just showing them, like, how you could do that.
Yes, and that's empowering them, too. It gives them, like, data to look at to be like, oh, my gosh, check out the decision I made and how, like, great of an impact it is.
And then also, say we made a decision and it didn't go so well.
Yep.
That's hard, too.
Allowing them the autonomy, though, with, like, a judgment-free zone.
This didn't work. Like, okay, when is the best time to change this intervention?
Yes.
Because there's so many opportunities.
Like, how long before you do change it. And reminding them that, like, as experienced BCBAs, we choose interventions all the time that don't result in effective, like,
there's a million ways.
Results.
There's a million scenarios that could happen within this one learning opportunity. So just try to remember that with each one.
We're trying. It's like trial
these are all
and
error. Like, these are all little points that we're making, but there's so many ways to go with it.
As long as you're using, like, evidence-based practices, give it your best, and, like, we're all learning.
Next one, evaluating the effectiveness of supervision through fieldwork.
Okay.
So this is periodically asking the trainee for feedback on the supervision process. Yes. I know we've talked about this like, a little bit already, so we'll just touch on it. Like, do you feel supported? Is there anything I could do for you? Is there anything you feel like you're lacking? Yes. Anything you want to learn right now that you aren't learning?
It's an open space. I use this time, like, I talk a lot about, like, their semesters for school, but I'm like, what are you learning in school and that you want to apply? Like, learning to apply the concepts is really, really tricky sometimes. So it's like, okay, tell me what you need from me to get these experiences. And
all of these are kind of examples of things you can do in your individual supervision session. I know we already talked about this, but it's that I just want to touch on it one more time because we're about to go into...
I have a code word.
Go for it.
I don't want to forget it before we move on. The code word 3, before I forget, is skills. Our last code word, we're done.
Okay, so we just talked about all of the things you want to try to hit on during your individual supervision session.
Yes.
So this is your scheduled regular one-to-one meetings, anytime you're bringing them into your supervisions, stuff of that sort. You're using this time to dive deep into specific case issues, their specific skill set. Remember, we're trying to keep things consistent here. Try to have a consistent schedule for them.
You want to schedule a meeting time. It could be bi-weekly or weekly, whatever like fits you best, depending on how much supervision you're getting, like one-on-one with learners.
So I want to touch on kind of the other supervisions that you could be providing or that you might get as a student.
Yeah.
So number one, let's start with observation with the client.
Okay.
All right. So you have your individual supervisor. They may or may not be the person that provides this next category of supervision.
Yep.
But if you've got multiple supervisors at your organization, you might have someone else providing that client like observation with you. But your one-on-one supervisor should be doing it as well. You can always ask them like, hey, could you come in too and see me?
I want to see this. Something like to keep in mind as a tip is like this can rotate between the different methods the observation can take place. So it can be like directly observed in person. This can be a telehealth observation. Or even, this is something that I think gets forgotten, is like a recorded video.
And this one's hard because you got to make sure you're following HIPAA.
So there's HIPAA guidelines and things like that. But this is something that I had to do as a student with my practicum like professors. I would have to like get supervision with them for assignments.
It's so like awkward, but I feel like it's also the one where like the person observing might not know the client, so they really just have no bias when they're watching you.
It's a little uncomfortable sometimes. And you have to watch it with them as a student. It's like, I don't like it.
So really, this is when you would be observing the trainee, working with the client via all those different methods that you just shared. And then you would provide real-time feedback through a like in-person like right there and then, or if they've requested it after or written, depending on what you've chosen or what you're comfortable with.
What works for you.
And then this would be either in the session or immediately after the session, really.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
You touched on it. Next is group supervision. And this is something I'm like still learning as a BCBA. I didn't have experience with this as a supervisee. But when you can have group supervision for students, like a number of students from 2 students to 10 students. And this is a group supervision where the trainees role play different scenarios, provide feedback to each other. You might be talking about specific topics relating to like shared learners. We really want to ensure that the group size allows for meaningful participation. So that's why there's the requirement from the BACB for 2 to 10. You don't want it to be too many people where they're not going to get
or too little. If it's just you,
that's not a group.
But going like around this, this could be like you don't want there's a requirement for how many there are a month or how many. It can't be, I believe, more than half.
I will have to, we'll dive in when we talk about the other like percentages that we're going to touch on in like a different episode. But we'll touch on that one then.
So there's requirements for that. And then alongside that, it doesn't like, so it's a little easy if you have like 2 or 3 students, right? Like, hey, let's all meet. My supervisor would do this and we would go over like terminology and stuff and would dive into that. Or we would be like, just like we would role play a lot, just me and my supervisor and our other it was Jenny.
Famous Jenny Manko.
We would go over things in our meetings like that in our group supervision settings. But because we had a fieldwork coordinator, one cool thing we did was we had larger groups of around like six-ish usually. It's usually 6-ish. So one other thing to keep in mind is that your group should be similar in skill set.
Yeah.
So you can't have a really brand new student and a higher skilled student in the same group because you couldn't be working on the same things together.
Go ahead. A lot of things that we do within these group supervisions at like our current location is we try and hone in on experiences that they may not be getting directly with clients so much or like have experience with.
Right.
So like those like novel things. We also do like little like trainings with them on how to do IOA data and they practice with each other. Just like things that they don't get direct experience with.
I really like that.
Easily.
I remember when it started here, essentially we were learning. Yeah. So a lot of the things we did was like, because we were all brand new, we would there was a book and it was like mini cases and we would like look at it together and be like, what could be changed? What's the issue here? We would go over that as a group. Yeah. Sometimes in the group supervisions, we would have assignments we needed to do before.
Right.
And then the field
bring it.
Yeah. Well, it was nice because I'm sure now if someone wasn't bringing in their work, that was like something they could talk about and give feedback on.
It's like feedback opportunities.
Yep.
I really love that.
So I like that part of it as well. And that's really the different types of...
Those are all the types of supervision we can provide.
So I feel like there's so much left still because there's so much to this. So I feel like remembering there are a lot of requirements. Go on the BACB website, read through them.
Read the newsletters. They're boring. Okay, it's hard. They're not fun, but it's our duty as BCBAs to read the newsletters and stay up to date on like the requirements. And they send them in our email. They make it easy for us.
They're pretty easy.
They're trying to reduce the response effort. Now we just have to read it.
Yep. So this was just a small part of it. Yeah. We'd love to do more on this topic because it's very deep.
It's heavy.
Especially like getting into like different types of tasks you could be. Yeah. Like, I know we touched on it, but there's so much.
It's like, about. This task list is like 3 pages long.
So we'll end it today because I got to get home to my child.
Yes. I'm so glad you're back in the studio, Yousra. I miss filming in person with you.
All right. Bye, guys. Talk to you later.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want your CEU credits, go to our website at blossomchildrencenter.com.
Talk to you later.
See you.